So I came across this incredible article about Anita Marshall, and I just knew that I had to get her to come onto GeoHug to have a chat with us. So Anita is a geoscientist based in Florida and had a near fatal encounter with a drunk driver. This suddenly made things like fieldwork a lot more challenging, but thankfully she did not let it stop her. So a lot of us believe that physical ability is necessary for a successful career in geology. So I'm honoured that Anita will be chatting with us today about her personal story, some of the work she's been doing to create pathways for people with disabilities, as well as some actions that all of us can do to create a more inclusive workplace. So thank you so much, Anita. It's absolutely wonderful having you.
Thanks for inviting me. This is very exciting. I think this is the biggest time offset in which I've ever presented. So, you know, new milestone for me. It's very exciting. It's 9:10 p.m. here in Florida. So yeah, big time offset. But this is very exciting. And yeah, so I'm happy to share a little bit with you about my backstory and about the work that I do. And I'm hoping to leave plenty of time for questions or discussions. Usually there's a lot of questions after these presentations, and I want you guys to feel comfortable and not to worry too much about, you know, saying the wrong thing or phrasing something incorrectly. Disability is a tricky subject, and you're not going to offend me. I promise you, academics have asked way more horrible questions than what will ever go through your head. So just, yeah, ask questions, and I'm hoping to have a great discussion. You can put it in the chat as we talk or wait till the end. However you all would like to do it. So I guess I will go ahead and share my screen. On the opening slide here, we have one of our group photos from our annual disability-friendly field trips that I help run every year at the Geologic Society of America conference. So those are held in different places across the US every year. And we create an accessible field trip so that everybody who wants to get out in the field and do geology is free to do that and go on a fun conference field trip like everybody else. So we'll come back around and talk a little bit about the work I do at the IAGD later. This is an overlook on the Mogollon Rim in northern Arizona. So sort of the northern transition zone between the very hot, low-lying parts of Arizona and the mountainy, forested parts of Arizona. So very, very, very pretty area. Okay, so a little bit about what we'll do today. We'll talk about, I'll share a little bit of my backstory, talk a little bit about disability and how it plays into geology, especially field work and how we train our students. Some of the things that I've done with accessible field courses. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details, but I'll share a little bit about our approach and some of the insights that I think are useful for everyone, whether they're academics or they're in industry. Anybody who works with teams in the geosciences hopefully can get something useful out of what I have to share. And then some current projects and a little bit about what you can do to make your geoscience workplaces more inclusive and accessible. And like I said, hopefully lots of time for Q&A and discussion. So a little bit about me. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the University of Florida. My primary research areas are geoscience education. So I research how people teach and learn geology. Disability in STEM and academia, barriers to diversity, volcanology, and near-surface geophysics. The volcanology and near-surface geophysics have very much taken a back seat as my work in accessibility has become mostly what people want from me. So that's where all the funding and the opportunities are. I hope at some point to be able to get back to volcanoes, but who knows? I'm sort of on a roll with this right now. And I am the Director of Operations for the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And I'm also a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. So a little bit about me. I also have a permanent physical disability and chronic fatigue from a car accident, which Jessica mentioned earlier. So a little bit about my backstory. I did my undergraduate degree and most of my master's degree as an able-bodied student. I did a very traditional geology track, which was very field oriented. So we traveled a lot. We did a lot of hiking. We did a lot of camping, a lot of outdoorsy, very ambitious type of things. You know, it's for a lot of people, that's what draws them to the geosciences is we tend to be outdoorsy people. We enjoy hiking and climbing or getting out and seeing things. And for me, that was very much the case. I was originally a music education major and took a geology class in high school, so which I enjoyed. So I took it in college. And I remember there was this week where my geology class was going on a field trip. And I could either go on the field trip or stay home and practice my flute in a windowless practice room for a couple hours every day. And I went on the field trip and never looked back. And so that was that. I did stay in the band because I wanted to keep my scholarship, but I changed my major when I got back from the field trip, and I've loved every minute of it ever since. So there was a big gap between my master's degree and my PhD, and that is where the car accident comes in. So what was supposed to be the last semester or second to last semester of my master's degree, I was hit as a pedestrian by a drunk driver. It was a very serious accident. I almost died at the scene and then almost died several more times in the hospital. I had to have many reconstructive surgeries. I was in a wheelchair for about a year while they put my leg back together. It basically derailed my geology career. That's what I thought at the time. When I was coherent enough to start thinking about it, one of the very first thoughts that came to me was that my geology career was over. And that was one of my first thoughts from my hospital bed. I wanted to be a field geologist. I wanted as a career to be the one out there getting the data. I was training as a geodesist. So I wanted to go out and install GPS units in the field in really extreme and remote places. I thought that would be a really awesome career. And I had never heard of a geologist with a disability. Like I sat there and I thought, I was like, well, like, could I do this? And my brain gave me a resounding no, absolutely not. Like, have you ever heard of anybody? Like, have you even seen anybody with so much as a cane or a crutch in any of your field studies at all? And I'm like, no, not at all. And in fact, you know, people who can't keep up on hikes are often mercilessly mocked. Like, I didn't see any sort of, you know, path forward there. And then you add to that the fact that I was in a geology department that had one female faculty member in the whole department. And, you know, I was like, okay, so I'm a woman with a disability. Like, I have no path forward here. Like, who's going to hire me? Nobody. So I finished up my master's mainly with a lot of help from my family. My dad quit his job, moved several hours to where I was going to school to help me go back to school. My grandfather, who was in a wheelchair from a stroke he had had a few years prior, let me borrow his wheelchair so I could go back to school before the semester was over. Disability paperwork and medical paperwork around getting a wheelchair is incredibly difficult to get through. And it can take months and sometimes years to actually get a decent wheelchair. And we didn't know how long I needed one at that point, but we knew that the clock was ticking for me to finish my master's work. So my grandpa stayed with me, and he would get himself all comfy in his recliner And then I would leave for school in his wheelchair, do my classes, and then come back and give him his wheelchair back. And so we literally shared a wheelchair for a semester, which is really the only way that I, finished remotely on time with my master's degree. So, it was a big family effort. My dad and my sister were my field assistants because I couldn't get to some of the sites that I'd been doing field work. And so I'd get as close as I could and use a walkie-talkie, or sometimes just yell and tell them what to do to get the data that I needed and the equipment set up. And so, it was a big family push there to get me get me through my master's degree. But, even with that degree, I was basically checking out of geology, done. I guess that's it for me. I got a job at a community college as an adjunct, so a part-time instructor teaching intro geology to community college students. And it actually paid worse than McDonald's. Like, I would have made more flipping burgers at McDonald's, but I loved it because it was still sort of, I was still in geology. I was just, teaching it to students instead of doing it in the field. And I never taught before. And this community college kind of took a shot on me, mainly because my professors put in a good word for me. And I sat there at the community college, and it started to get really old because I was only allowed to teach the same course over and over again. And that's nice and all, but like, I just felt like I wasn't going anywhere. And that's not what I wanted to do. That wasn't, what I was really hoping to get out of geology. And in my class, I showed this video every semester called Volcano, Nature's Inferno. It was an old National Geographic documentary on volcanoes. And one of the segments talks about a geologist from the University of Arizona that was seriously injured in a volcanic eruption. And it gives this little story about how, as he learned to, as he relearned to walk, he went back to the volcano and started his research back up. And, I showed this video every semester. And at some point, I stopped watching it passively and started actively watching. And I was like, oh my gosh, like a lot of his injuries are similar to mine. And I mean, his is a way cooler backstory. Like, he got his from a volcano, but, I thought, well, he can do it. Like, he's doing it. Maybe I could do it. So I started going out for PhD programs. I was accepted to the University of Florida, and of course went straight into volcano research because that's what kind of got me interested in going, taking a shot in my PhD. And I did a split dissertation on volcanology and geoscience education, looking at the barriers that are present for people with disabilities in the geosciences. Originally, that was not going to be my focus. I wasn't going to do the geoed part, but, so we went on all these cool field trips when I was doing my volcanology work. And I was always in the back. If I kept up at all, I was always in the back, and it made for some kind of cool photo ops. I get some really cool, like, geologists in the field kind of pictures. And, that was great and all. There's the one I took with a telephoto of my fellow students getting a really, what I assume, great lecture on Masaya Volcano in Nicaragua, taken from as far as I could get on that terrain, straining to hear across the crater to see if I could hear what they were saying, which I couldn't. But that happened a lot on my field trips where, I'd get as far as I could get and I'd get ditched. And after a while, I started thinking, what, this really stinks. And, maybe there are some other students, like, this can't be an isolated problem. I can't be the only person that feels like they're getting a bit of a raw deal here, that there's no thought to, how to teach students who aren't these hale and hardy explorers, these students that can't climb over this rugged terrain and do all these things. Are we just writing them off? Like, are we just SOL? Like, I guess geology is not for us. And that's what got me interested in this topic. And then when I started doing research into this topic, I realized that this is a huge problem. I was certainly not an isolated case, but what made me unusual was that I was sticking around, that most students that had encountered this problem left. They gave up on their graduate studies. They switched to a different discipline. They weren't sticking around, and they weren't about to get rid of me. I'm one of these people that rather than give up, I'm going to fix the problem. Like, I see a problem, I'm going to fix it. It just makes me want to stick around even more. So when I started looking into this problem, I found some incredibly depressing statistics, which I will share with you now. So if you ask American high school students if they are interested in a career in science, technology, engineering, or math, or what we collectively call STEM fields, 22% of all the students that say yes at the high school level have some sort of disability. Now, what makes this number remarkable is that the general population in the US, according to US Census data, roughly 20% of the US population has some form of disability. So what we're seeing here in high school is that there's actually an overrepresentation here of people with disabilities wanting to go into the geosciences, right? It's actually more than what it would be if it was reflective of general census, right? So there's actually an overrepresentation there. That means there's a strong interest from people with disabilities who want to go into science and technology careers. But when you look at how many people get a bachelor's degree in a STEM field, only 10% of those graduates have a disability. So somewhere between, yay, I'm off to college to be a scientist, and getting their bachelor's degree, we've lost more than half of them, right? If you look at the number of master's students with, and you look at that population, only 6% of people that hold a master's degree in a science, technology, or math field have a disability. If you go up to the PhD level, that drops to 2%. So again, we're talking about, a group that is about 20% of the US population, wildly underrepresented when you get through academia. So something in that path is keeping these students from succeeding. And it turns out it's not just one thing, it's many things. And I actually found that the challenge was finding something to focus on because there were so many problems. And I was just one PhD student. So, you have to kind of pick your battle. And it turns out that was pretty tricky. So in general, there were 3 reasons why people with disabilities were leaving the geosciences: environmental barriers, institutional barriers, and social barriers. So by environmental barriers, I mean what you think of as inaccessibility, right? Like there's only stairs and no elevator or no ramp, right? That's an environmental problem, right? It's a problem with the physical environment. Institutional means that there are policies in place that actively push against these students' participation. There's something in the way that the degree paths are structured, which push these students out. And then social barriers means that there's a real stigma on people with disabilities in science and technology fields. And oftentimes that social barrier is the hardest one for students to overcome, that feeling that they don't belong. And often it's because they're getting told either subtly or not so subtly every day that they don't belong, sometimes to their face, as I found out when I went back to school. So I decided to land on field experience as the area that I really wanted to focus on for 2 reasons. One, it was what I was passionate about. It was the thing that hooked me on geology. It's what I wanted to do as my career. I absolutely love going into the field. It's my favorite part about being a geologist. But I also discovered that it was a tremendous barrier to people completing geoscience degrees. Many US geoscience programs require a field course in order to get your degree. So this is usually a half of a summer where you disappear off into the mountains somewhere and you learn things like field mapping, or data acquisition, or some have like a geophysics focus or a hydrology focus. But basically, it's a couple weeks where you go off into the middle of nowhere and learn geology in a sort of a hands-on immersive environment. These field experiences are really important. They are commonly used as a metric for students applying to grad school. So when they're transitioning up from undergrad to graduate, and they're also a way to sort of gauge students for internships and jobs. We have a lot of our geoscience professionals that work with our department here who have explicitly told me that they will not look at a student who doesn't have field experience for any position in their company, whether or not their job is especially relevant to having field experience. It's sort of a rite of passage in geology that many people just expect students to have. And they don't even think about why they might not have that experience. And in fact, most professional geologist certifications here in the US require a certain number of hours in the field doing field research. However, accessible field experiences are practically non-existent. There are only a handful of them. Most of them are non-credit accruing. So they're like fun experiences you can go do, but they don't count towards your degree. So there's no pathway forward. If you need an accessible field experience, you can't get your degree. Like, it's just over. That's a major institutional barrier, right? So one of the interviews that I did, I interviewed a number of students with disabilities to kind of get an idea of what the landscape looked like. And this quote really stood out to me. One of the students told me, I've been told because there's one big field experience, I can't take the course, which I decided not to fight. We have to make these choices. We have these different backgrounds in geoscience because of our disability. So, here's a student who was told explicitly she couldn't take a course she needed to graduate because she had a disability, and they didn't want to accommodate her. What really gets me about this student is when I started asking her what she needed, I thought, oh, well, it must be that it was just unreasonable, right? She needed a lot to make the course accessible. It turns out her only problem was manual dexterity with her fingers, and she needed permission to use a tablet instead of a paper notebook in the field. And they told her she couldn't take the class. So yeah. Like I said, that kind of leans back into that stigma issue, right? Like there would have been no difference in what she learned and what her classmates learned. It's just like, it's an unnecessary barrier. And I find they crop up all the time in my research. So, it can be really a big topic when you talk about how to address accessibility of a place that is by its nature inaccessible, right? Like Mother Nature doesn't care about accessibility, right, at all. So this can be really challenging. There are some low-tech ways. You can use tactile versions of your maps and figures. 3D prints are amazing. You can also do some sort of DIY tactile maps with things like hot glue, which work really great to raise lines on maps for students that have low vision. You can use audio and visual cues together for instructions in the field. You can put captions on all your instructional videos so that students don't have to hear what you're saying if you have students with hearing limitations. The buddy system and collaborative teams is a easy, incredibly impactful way to make field experiences more accessible. A lot of times people just need a little help, right? They just need a buddy, and that can make a huge difference. And the big one, be flexible, right? Like, don't be that guy who said like, oh, you have to take digital notes. Well, you're out, right? Like, be flexible. So one of the other things you can do is really think about where you're doing field work. Now, in industry, you don't have a lot of choice a lot of times, right? You have a location that you're doing a job. That's where you're doing your job. But in academia, we do have a choice. We take students in the field to teach them something about geology or the natural world or how to do a particular job. there are many places we can go. It's very rare that you're going after some geologic phenomenon that's so rare you can only go to one place in the world and see it. Normally there are options. So if you think about, why you're going to that site, and if there's a site that's more accessible that you could teach the same concept, maybe go there instead, right? That'd be a big help. Think about access for both vehicles and individuals, right? How will people get around in this site, and how does that limit who can participate? Think about the conditions. How long are you going to be out there? Is there shade? Are there bathrooms? Those things are very important. And then tools. Think about what kind of equipment you'll use, and if that equipment has some things that could be improved in terms of accessibility. So where I work is sort of the intersection of field work and technology. I use technology to bridge the gap of accessibility. So, we use things like collaborative teams with tablets and mobile Wi-Fi hotspots and that sort of thing. And it's very challenging to explain exactly how I do field work because it's really different. So instead, I'm going to show this little 2-minute video and then we'll chat a little bit. But this kind of gives you an idea of how I approach field work and how it's a bit different than what you're used to.
Remote collaboration uses teamwork and technology to enable students in different locations to collaborate on learning activities in the field.
Today we're using a local wireless network to connect up students that are spread across this site. So on the local network we've got video streaming between the iPads, we've got photographs that can be shared, and we're using walkie-talkies to keep people in audio.
2 approaches to remote collaboration were used during the course of the project. At the first field site, student teams worked at different locations and collected data to build a collaborative structural map of the area.
The area that we chose along the old railway track was an ideal location. Here we were able to use the railroad, the old rock canyons that were cut out for all of the students, mobile and less mobile, to come along and put their hands on the outcrop, able to use technology that I've just seen for the first time in the field, really, at such a general level, dealing with the iPads, measuring dip and strike, taking photographs, communicating between each other's, groups by the lakeshore, groups on the road, all working in unison. Very, very good indeed.
While the road provided access to some outcrops, the combination of rock and bog made the rest of the field site far less accessible. This is where mixed ability groupings really shine.
If the sheep can do it, so can I.
That's what I'm thinking.
Through the use of wearable cameras and tablets, these students share their experiences with a first-person vantage point of fieldwork in this challenging terrain.
The rain's like ice daggers.
Another location pushed the idea of access through technology even further. With no accessible route to the field site and windy conditions, the base team would have to stay inside the vans for communication to work effectively. And their only means to conduct field work would be through the remote link with their teammates.
Larger boulders at the bottom, followed by thinning and silty material in the middle, and then back to larger. Are you seeing that?
That makes sense too, because as the glacier retreated, there was all the fluvial activity from like the outwash plain.
Is there anything you'd like us to zoom in on?
Through the use of streaming video and photo sharing, teams were able to work together in real time to study the geology of a location that would have traditionally excluded participation for students with mobility limitations.
Okay, so there were a lot of things that we learned, that we've learned in several iterations of doing this. One is that creating shared experiences create really strong bonds, even amongst students who aren't physically able to access all the sites. Sharing these photos and videos really help build those bonds between students. These are some pictures from a version we did in Arizona with cactuses and cows and all kinds of things that many of the city kids had never experienced before and had to share with their friends. We found that community building is really important, that social inclusion was very closely linked to academic performance. If students felt like they were isolated or weren't part of the team, they really didn't participate as much. So it was really important for them to feel included. One of the third insights is that collaborative use of tech can improve work quality for everybody. One of the interesting things we've noticed is that the students without disabilities on these projects work harder. They're more focused on detail and getting things right because they want to be good teammates to their partners. So everybody is sort of working hard to bridge that gap and come together and do a really high quality product, mainly because they don't want to let down their teammates. So this collaborative approach really seems to improve the overall experience for everybody. And one of the interesting things that I've found is that inclusive programs create a positive ripple effect beyond the program. So one of the students on a previous field trip who had been very quiet about having a disability and basically was trying to pass as not having one, decided to be very vocal after that and even started a blog called Type 1 Geologist for diabetics who want to go into the field of geology. She gives tips and advice on how she survives in the field and has really become a strong advocate. I've helped some of my students write papers like the one that I totally ripped off the title for this talk, Spaces for Geoscience, Creating Spaces for Geoscientists with Disabilities to Thrive. And he even won a writing award for that. So I'm really, really proud of him for that. Some of the projects that I have that push this idea forward, the LIFT Kit, the Lending Library of Inclusive Field Technology, acknowledges that not everybody has the funds for iPads and mobile Wi-Fi hotspots and drones, but they might really be keen to try this stuff. So we got a grant to buy a bunch of these tech tools and create a lending library so that programs that can't afford it can still incorporate these inclusive approaches in their own field courses. And then the new one that's just launching is the Geospace Program. That's Geoscientists Promoting Accessible Collaborative Experiences. This will be an accessible and inclusive planetary geology field course, which I'm very excited about. That's going to launch next year and will count for field course credit and will help get these students through to finish their degrees. People have been asking me why planetary geology. Planetary analogs on Earth make really great places to teach basic geology. Also, geology on other planets is super inaccessible for everybody. So it makes a nice level playing field and a really interesting way to approach field work when you assume inaccessibility for everybody right at the start. It puts everybody in that mindset to problem solve. And it gives us a great chance to teach technology and data acquisition and processing techniques that are used across the geoscience industry, not just a planetary geology. So really excited about that. Some of the common challenges once these students get out into the workforce are things like inaccessible infrastructure in offices, labs, and conferences, job descriptions with unnecessary or irrelevant requirements. How many of you guys have seen position announcements like must be able to lift 50 pounds? Like it's an office job. Why? All right. Or one of the ones that catches some of my friends that are deaf is must be able to speak English. Okay, well, what does like American Sign Language count as English? Or do you mean like vocally out loud, right? So, you know, sometimes there are job descriptions that really turn off people from even applying. And then HR personnel and managers that aren't trained in equitable interview processes. I could tell you some horror stories about people with disabilities having awful job interviews because people just really weren't prepared to handle somebody with a disability. And in fact, at a conference, I was actually asked why I do what I do, because why would a disabled person even want a geology degree? They won't get a job with it. And that was a hiring manager for a big geology company. Yay. So there's definitely lots of work to be done, especially in the cultural stigma department. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up there. And here's some of my key points, some contact information for me, and a beautiful drone image from northern Arizona. This is a volcano called Rattlesnake Crater in a very, very beautiful part of Arizona, kind of close to the Grand Canyon. So thank you for listening, and I hope you guys have some questions.
Thank you so much, Anita. That was, yeah, really, really incredible. And so appreciative that you've taken the time to talk to us about your story and some of the great things that we can all be doing. So thank you so much. Some really nice, so many comments coming through, such an inspiration and well done, and very informative. So everyone's really appreciative that you've taken the time to chat. How do we make STEM more enticing for disabled kids?
I think this is one of the big takeaways from that graphic I showed, early on in the presentation. We don't really have to. The interest is there. People with kids with disabilities are very interested. In fact, I read a really interesting paper on this that says they think they were theorizing that it was because kids with disabilities often are exposed to things like medical professions or the way prosthetics work, or they get thinking about those types of science and technology things far earlier than other kids their age. And so there's this sort of natural bent towards that. They've had more exposure. And so, a lot of times it's not really an issue of getting them interested. It's an issue of keeping them in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Because the interest is there. It's just, we need those pathways that they can follow to be successful.
Yeah, another compliment, really interesting talk, Anita. I think you make a great point regarding inaccessibility for everyone. That provides opportunity for geologists with disability to use their skills. I'm sure with the future of technology, big data, that companies should be harnessing these skills. What do you think is the biggest barrier to companies hiring geos with a disability? And there's a quick PS. I think your family is awesome for supporting you.
They are the most amazing. I think about that a lot, where I'd be without my awesome family, and certainly not here, that's for sure. But I think one of the biggest barriers is the lack of talent pool. Because there are so many barriers in the training part, right? Getting them through and trained up as geoscientists, that pool is so small that even if you wanted to intentionally hire people with disabilities, who are trained as geoscientists, the pool is very small. So I really do think that's one of the big challenges, is just connecting with that talent.
Yeah.
And if you do have a job and you do want a disabled geoscientist to go out for it, contact me and I'll put it on the IAGD listserv, which goes out to several thousand disabled geologists, mostly in the US, but we do have some presence in Australia and other parts of the world too. So.
Okay. Yeah. Are you using drones as well?
It's one of my favorite tools. There's nothing like a bird's eye view to get a sense of the bigger picture, right? And, you see a lot of things you missed on the ground. It really is amazing. That shift in perspectives gives you this new look at things. I took a drone out to prepare for this new field course to a site that I'd been 5 times already. And as soon as I got the drone in the air, I noticed things that I had not noticed before on those previous trips where everything I'd done was from the ground. It's just, they're fantastic tools in research and geology.
Yeah. It's been really good discussion. So I'm so thankful for your time. I really, really appreciate it.